All right then. So now let's discuss about the data types and the variables and the constants, right? So basically in the C programming language, the data types, variables, constants play crucial roles in storing and manipulating the data, right? So let's go through each of these concepts one by one. So here, let's understand about the data type much more better way. So basically data types is we can say data type in the C is specify the type of the data that a variable can hold. So C support several basic data types that can be broadly categorized. So over here, for instance, let's say, so I'm going to create a data type, right? Let's say this is the data type. So basically in C, the data types, it's categorized into two main types, right? Type 1, which is going to be the basic data type. Basic data type, or we used to say this as primitive data type. Primitive data type, which is the built-in data types we can say in other hand, right? This is the one. And the other type, which is the non-primitive, which is called derived data type. We used to say it as derived, or we used to say this one as non-primitive data types. So that's the type of the two different types, 1 and 2. These are the two different types that we do have. So let's talk about the basic data type what we have in our hand right now. So basic data type, which comes in like the four major things: integer, float, double, character, and one more thing, which is void. So basic data type, which comes with the first one is the integer, right? That's the first one. And the second one, which is going to be the float. And the third one is double. And the fourth one is the character. And the last one is the void, right? These are the 5 major parts which comes with your okay, these are the 5 major things which comes with your basic data type, right? All right, here we go. So these are the 5 different data types: float, double, and character, and void. So basically you need to understand over here, which is all right, here we go, right? So the basic data type is categorized into integers, void, float, double, and 5 different basic data types. So basically integer means, which is int, right? So basically integer means int, which means the minus infinity to the plus infinity, all the positive numbers and the negative numbers, like to be exactly the whole numbers, not the decimal numbers, the whole numbers, which comes under this very specific category, right? Which is what this The keyword is int, which comes under this very specific category, which is all the whole numbers, which comes under this very specific category, and it will takes 4 bytes. If it is a 32-bit operating system, if it is a 32-bit, then it will takes 4 bytes, or if it is an 64-bit, then it will takes the 8 bytes. 4 or 8 bytes. 4 or 8 bytes. For what? For 64-bit, right? This is the thing that we need to understand about the int, right? So let's talk about the float now. So basically, if int is the whole number, then in the sense, then what will be the float? Of course, the float will be the decimal numbers. So the float is the decimal number. Float is basically the floating point, like 3.14, 3.2, from minus infinity to the plus infinity. All the point variables, point numbers, which comes under this, the float, the decimal numbers, which is exactly going to take the same size as your integer. 4 bytes for 32 bits, 4 or 8 bytes on 64 bits. That's the float. All right, that's the float. Cool. And this is the int. This is what? This is the int. All right. And now let's talk about the double. Double, it's like you can say the double precision floating point. By default, for a normal floating point, we'll get 6 decimal units after the dot. If you want more than that, like 12, you need to go for double, right? That's the reason we are using the double precision floating point, which quite exactly the same, but it doubled the size. So float gives you the 6 decimal units after the dot. When the double will gives you the double precision decimal number, double precision decimal number, right? Like the main reason is, like, if you need more than 6 decimal units after the dot, you need to go for double, right? And the character is quite simple, like a single letter. If you need any single letter, very specific letter or anything, you need to go for character, char, and that is a single character. You should wrap it with single quotes inside the single quotes. So character, this is the character. Char is the keyword which helps you to keep a single alphabetical letter, and that should wrap it inside the single quotes, right? So the size variant, it will take only 1 byte. You need to keep in mind, the integer, float, and double will take the size as 4 and 8, whereas the character will always take only 1 bytes, right? So these are the basic data type. So the keywords what we have learned over here: int, float, and double, and finally character. And last one, only one thing it's remaining, which is the void. Void, basically it means empty. It doesn't return anything. Basically void in the sense what? It's an empty, right? These are the basic data type. On the other hand, when it comes to the derived data type, you need to understand that we have several data types for that too, which is quite understandable. So we have the arrays, we have structure, and we have pointers, right? So these are the derived data type, right? You need to understand that these are all the derived data types. Later, we'll discuss about all these actions and everything one by one after that, so that you can understand what is this and how we are going to use it in our real life, in the real examples, what we are to discuss right now. So this is all about the data types, right? So now with along with the data types, so think about it that you're having a laptop or mobile phone, so that we are having a group of files, right? So before grouping it, it's just a dump of files. The reason why we are grouping it, like categorizing it, why? Like if you talk about the pictures, we used to categorize it like family and group, officials and personals, and even inside the family, like we group it with a separate function wise. And the reason why we are grouping all those files and everything to access it easier, just exactly the same ways I never used to collect the data and simply dump it into the memory space so that I can't access it for later purpose. So that's the reason we need the variables. So variable will hold the data type together, which helps us to understand it much better way and to access it much easier. Whenever I needed it, I can collect it and I can access it and I can store it back in the same place by using the same variable name. That's the reason we need the variables, right? So variable is nothing but a named storage location in your computer memory. So which helps you to store your data, which is nothing but your values, right? So let's understand how to define those variables. So to define those variables in a sense, so what I'm talking about over here, for instance, if I wish to create a number, all I have to say int age, that's it, right? So when it comes to create a declaration, that means creating a variable, we have two types of declaration. One, which is static, and two, another one is dynamic. So static is nothing but constants. By the time whenever I'm creating a variable itself, I'm going to assign a value to it. A constant will never going to change, right? And the dynamic, which is I can change those variables values dynamically during the program execution time itself, right? So this is the integer variable, and float salary, which is going to be the floating variable, and character, let's say grade, this is the character variable, right? So think about it that if you wish to initialize these variables, so how to initialize? Age equals to 5 and salary is equals to 3500.5 and the grade is equals to, you need to use the single quotes and you can assign those values. So this is how you need to initialize those variables, right? So now let's talk about the constants. So basically constants are fixed values that cannot be altered during the execution of the program. So we do have two types of constants. So let's understand the constants much better. So over here, what is the constants? Let's understand the constants first. The definition of the constants. Constants are the fixed values. Constants are the fixed values that cannot be changed. That cannot be changed during the execution. During the execution of your program. So basically we have two different types of constants. One is literal. And another one is the symbolic constants, right? So in the literal constants, we have integer literals, floating point and character literals, which exactly what we did over here, right? These are the constants, literal constants. And now on the other hand, now we need to discuss about the symbolic constants. So basically constants, the symbolic constants, which is defined by using the keyword called hash define. So that is the hash. What's the main reason we use the keyword hash? Hash is nothing but what? That's the pre-processing operator, right? Or you can say the const keyword, or you can either use the preprocessor, or you can use the const keyword to create the constant, right? But in this case, we're going to use the hash, right? So let me show you a real example, like how to define a constant, right? So how to define, for instance, over right after your the header file, the place where you're including your header file, right after here, I'm gonna say hash define roll 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 number, which is going to be 1001, right? So this is how I'm just initializing it, but it's not reasonable, this variable, because the roll number is never going to be the same, right? Just for example purpose. So hash define roll number 1001, which means we defined a constant, a symbolic constant, so that I can use this variable whenever I need it inside. For instance, let's say if I'm trying to print it, printf, I'm trying to print the roll number over here, roll number colon. So basically the roll number which carries the constant value of an integer. So all I have to do is to say percentage d. So don't worry about that percentage d. What is that percentage d and all those things? I will tell you exactly later what is that and how to use it for different data types and everything, right? So now if I save these changes and if I run this file, and now you can see we are getting the variable as roll number 1001. So basically this is the globally defined the symbolic constant. I can use it whenever I need inside this program. It doesn't matter how many functions I do have, I can directly use this variable at any point inside any functions inside this program. That's the reason we have this symbolic constant. Now let's jump to the point, the place where we have to understand this identifier. So we know that what kind of data type it is just by looking at 3500 and the character, but the machine doesn't understand this. So that's the reason we need the help of the identifiers. So identifier helps the compiler to understand what kind of data type it is. For instance, if it is %d, which means that is an int. If it is %f, that means float, or double, that defines on the place where you are defining it. Then if it is %s, which means it's a string, and if it is %u, which means it's an address, memory address, right? So these are the different identifiers. That's the which helps the compiler to understand what kind of data type that we are working with. And finally, which is the %c, which is the character, right? So by the time when you wish to print it or when you do process it, you need to use these kinds of identifier to read it and to print it on the screen. All right, so that we will discuss on the input and output section later, right? So this is all about your data types and variables and constants. So the program, the example which we discussed over here, which basically demonstrate how to use the data types and variables and constants. This is just a simple program, right? How to create it and how to access it. Later in the section of input and output section, we'll try to understand how to use and realize and how to use the variables in a more efficient way, like how to create it dynamically and how to create it and how to add the values dynamically and how to use it inside the program and how to process the inputs to display the outputs on the console. That we will discuss in the next section. I hope you understand all the data types and variables and everything. So without wasting your time, let's move on to the next section.